What's up, guys? It's day 3 of the vlog, and last 2 days, first day was getting set up, figuring out what we should contribute to, decided to work on Simple Calendar. Yesterday, we went through some of the open tickets, the issues, and the pull requests that I had open. We cleaned up a bunch of those, and then I was really happy to wake up to 3 new ones. So we've got Rodrigo and MacLover7 working on Simple Calendar with us, which is really, really fun. So, yeah, what we're going to do is take a look at what has happened in the last 24 hours, I guess, since last time, since I did the vlog, and see what's up. So I've noticed that one of them, Rodrigo, wants to add Travis CI to the app so that we can have this in the README, so you can see that every time and you may have seen this on other GitHub repositories, there's like either down here around the pull request area, it will show if the pull request has passed the tests, and it can be run on like Travis CI, which is sweet. So it will automatically run the test when you push something. So that is really cool. Definitely recommend using that. Travis CI is like one of those ones that is used the most. And let's pull up their website here. It's used probably one of the most on open source projects. There's Circle CI, and I use that at work actually. And Travis is awesome. They're all really great. Anything to encourage you to run your test more often is a good thing. So yeah, we're gonna take a look at this then and see what we can do. First, we'll probably actually need to get Rspec set up and installed so that we actually have tests to run, because Travis CI or any of these other continuous integration servers are pretty much useless without it. So let's see what we got here. So we all know that we break stuff. I've never written a broken line of code in my life. Come on. So use Travis CI in a couple Ruby repositories every single day after pushing commits. This add-on makes it easier for me to check what went wrong and test and fix them right in the moments. Notice. Definitely. Cool. So let's take a look at his example. Yep, awesome. This is his own personal website and the Rspec tests running on Circle CI. Awesome. It's good stuff. So, cool. I think, not quite sure. We have to install the Travis gem. We need to log in to Travis, their GitHub API key, which I may have to edit out, by the way. Don't want to give that out. And init Travis in the repository. Yeah. All right. Now let's take a look at the other 2 pull requests we got in the last 24 hours. So Rodrigo added Rspec with documentation format flag, which is awesome. Yeah. So here's the files that he's added. So we got 3 changed files. This is an Rspec config file. It basically just says what are the default options we should have. Color, he added the format documentation in there, so that will print out the Rspec tests in the documentation format. So you can look that up if you want, but I wouldn't worry about it. It's just a different way of displaying the test output. And spec simple calendar spec is all the tests. We have the regular spec helper that we're going to require, which is added down here below. Require Rails, describe the simple calendar module, has a version number, requires simple calendar, and that is successful. That's a great test to have to make sure that works appropriately. Although I wonder if that works, because we're already describing simple calendar, so the assumption is that exists already, that it's already required the library. I'm not quite sure. We may need to look into that. And then it requires Rails. I don't know if these tests are doing exactly what the intention is, so we may have to dive into those. moving on next, spec helper. This looks like the default generated Rspec spec helper file, which is great. We have all the comments of like the various options, the explanations of what can be configured in here. We're gonna expect with Rspec, mock with Rspec, verify partial doubles, so on. This looks good. I think the only thing that I want to make sure that we take a look at here is that these require simple calendar and require Rails tests to actually do what we want them to do. So I'm actually going to go ahead and merge this one. I think it's good. And we can work on those tests as well. So same as before, I'm just going to do the instructions here at the bottom to make sure that we grab this from the command line. It's good practice to be in. We want to just use git from the command line as much as possible. So create the new branch, pull the changes down into that branch. We can save that. That is what we expected. And the same thing as before, you check out the master branch, you merge those, and then you push to origin master. So we'll push that up, and then we got a rejection here. So this is one of those times where we've done something that's different, or the master branch on GitHub is different than what we have locally. So we can look at our logs here. So I've merged the branch, Rspec, into Rspec. We merged that branch. Looks like kind of the same commit with different messages. I think because these, the pulled it into that branch, and then this merge gave a different message, the second message. So this is merging that branch. This was merging his into the Rspec branch. So let's take a look and see what GitHub has for simple calendar as the last commit here. So we have this commit with B2CE as the hash. And if we run git log, we should see that here at the bottom, or at some point in here. B2CE, and I don't see it actually. B2CE. So we don't have this latest commit that we pushed up previously. So we actually need to git pull origin master to make sure that we get that latest code from GitHub. And that is one of those times where we've pushed some stuff up to GitHub. Maybe you merged with the merge button in GitHub's pull request UI or something, and there's commits on GitHub that aren't on your local machine, and you need to pull those into your local machine. Just one of those things that definitely happens more often when you're working on like 2 computers, or you're working with 2 people or more. You'll end up having to do a lot of merging, and it's good to get familiar with all of that, especially doing it manually in the commands rather than doing it with pull requests on GitHub, because there's a lot of stuff you actually need to do when you're working with a team. Always good to do that by hand if you can. So cool. That merged, pulled down the code from GitHub, the latest version, and merged successfully. So now we actually can push up all of those merges of that pull request into GitHub. So now you should see that the pull request is closed. You can go to this. It's been successfully merged. Thank you, Rodrigo. That was awesome. And now let's take a look at that the next one. We've got added Rspec for testing and removed Ruby Forge project link. So later on, I can add a Travis YAML to run CI tests, which is great. Everybody is working on the same things, which is another interesting thing. A lot of people will do very similar next steps. And so one of these pieces of working on open source is going to be managing other people trying to do the same thing. So we need to look at all of the things that are going on and make sure that we handle those appropriately. So one thing that's really interesting here is that in the gem spec change, that MacLover7 put in, he removed the RubyForge project, which is old stuff. RubyForge, I don't know that, I don't even really remember what RubyForge was for. Yeah, I don't remember really being around and ever having used it. So it shut down in 2013. I don't think I really ever used it. It was like it's just kind of old. So it's deprecated. Removing this from the gem spec makes sense. And another thing here is that he added the development dependency of Rspec, which is something I don't think we actually have in the other one, and so that is super useful. So when you write your gem spec, you want to make sure you add your dependencies for running this in someone else's project, but there's development dependencies, and those are used for when you're doing development. So if you run your tests with Rspec, you need to make sure that you add Rspec into your gem spec file. So that is certainly... this is certainly a line of code that we should add. Shoulda is another dependency that he's added, which could be good. If you don't know Rspec shoulda, you can take a look at that. Thoughtbot made it. Do a lot of awesome stuff. So it allows you to say should and reference objects using that, which is pretty cool. So you can have like this. So when you're describing posts, you can say the post should belong to user, and it will automatically know how to translate the reference there, so it knows what it's talking about. So it reads a little bit more like English, which I think is great. It depends on how we end up writing our tests. We can use it. We don't have to use it. There's other Rspec syntax for this. This is something that a lot of people do use, so I'm like not opposed. And I believe that we use it in some of our tests at work as well. Now here's a little difference. The spec helper file is different. Spec underscore helper rather. This file name right here is usually what it is that is the default. So usually you have a spec helper file. And it should look like this, I think, generally when you create a new Rspec project. So that's interesting that it's named. So it's named differently, and you can tell that he set it up manually, which is cool. So he's got a much lighter weight config. It's a lot easier to read. And yeah, let's see if there's any differences. So we got Rspec configure. So here, actually, there's some loading of paths and directories and requires happening beforehand. And then Rspec configure block. So fail fast is true, filter run, focused is true. So fail fast basically means that when the first test fails, you want to kill running the test suite because a test failed. Sometimes that's super useful. Other times you just want to count how many tests have failed. It's kind of personal preference. It's nice to know if the test suite failed and be able to jump in immediately. Other times, like I personally like to not fail fast so I can see if there's consistent errors throughout the test suite. And sometimes that tells you that if you get the same error, that you're doing duplicates in your tests. So it could be a sign that like you are writing tests in your code that are duplicated, and you could remove some of those tests or rearrange them so that they test smaller pieces rather than duplicating stuff and making your test suite slow. So merit to both of those. Fail fast is awesome if you've already written a really great test suite and you know exactly what you're doing. So yeah, either way, always a good option. Filter run, focused to true, alias example fit, focused, pending, okay. Config run all when everything filtered is true. And then he added a spec, simple calendar spec. So this one's interesting. It's very similar to the simple calendar spec that we have here. And this one tests that it has a version number, and so does this one. Now, what's interesting is that this one expects the version to not be nil, and this one expects it to equal a specific version number string. Now, there's a big difference between those and the robustness of the tests. So this simple calendar version equal to a string is great because it's very exacting, but it's actually very hard for us to continue maintaining because, well, when I release the next version, it's going to be not 1.1.10, it'll be 1.1.11, or it might be 1.2.0 or something like that. So this test is actually not as useful as you might expect. It's good right now, but it makes more work for us to maintain in the future. And I would go with expect this variable to not be nil. So this is actually what I would recommend keeping around. And again, if you can reference simple calendar version, then requiring the gem is maybe not gonna test anything because clearly it's already loaded for this test to actually run and pass. So I think these two tests we might actually want to remove. As long as we can get to this point, if our test suite runs at all, we have to kind of assume that simple calendar loaded because that's what we're testing, and probably our dependency is loaded, which is Rails. So if we can get our test suite to run, period, then you can kind of assume that that is loaded properly. So I would actually delete those two and just keep this one around and not use this version of the has a version number test. So we also have a spec support rail tie. Maybe this is setting up. So this is a simple calendar Rails rail tie initializer object. Maybe this is setting up for testing the rail tie. So if you look in lib simple calendar, we have a rail tie. And all this does is inherits from Rails's rail tie functionality, and rail tie just says, hey, when you load this gem, we're going to add this initializer, and it's code that Rails will run when you include this gem, when you set up your Rails app, and it gets configured and loaded. So this really just says, hey, all those view helpers you created for the calendar, month calendar, and week calendar, go ahead and add those into the view helpers module, include that in there so that they're available throughout the Rails app. That's really all that does, and I'm gonna guess the intention is for this to test that rail tie. Yeah, I've actually never tested a rail tie before, so maybe we should take a look at checking out some other people's examples on that. How to test a rail tie. Rails. Extending Rails 3, tested gem. This might be one that's a little harder to Google. So let's see. Draper is a gem that has a rail tie, and it's similar. It's a view decorator kind of thing. And maybe they have a spec for this. So let's see if we can find anything. Yeah, we may just want to do a regular old integration spec. Let's see if we can find anything. Draper. Yeah. Helper proxy. View helper spec. Describe view helpers. It behaves like view helpers. Class new include view helpers. So there's a require support shared examples view helpers, and if we go into support shared examples view helpers, we might be able to see in here what it's doing, and maybe we can reverse engineer our own way of testing that. And maybe we don't really need to be super worried about it either. It could be something as simple as saying, like, because once this loads, action view base is going to send that into view helpers. Maybe we can just access action view base and then see if the week calendar method exists. Maybe that's all we really need to do, and as long as this method gets called, maybe that's how we can test that. So maybe we can get away with something simpler, but we'll have to wait and see, I think. Or find someone who does know how to do that properly. So I think let's just take this rail tie code here and leave a comment for MacLover7 and ask him, how does this help us test the rail tie? Because we can assume that's what it's for. This also might be overriding the Rails rail tie so that it's like a stub that we can access to. So we'll find out. Let's ask him. Does this help us test the rail tie inclusion in a Rails app? We'll find out. So we've decided that we want to at least keep the other version of this spec specifically. I think we'll just stick with the defaults for Rspec for now, but something we definitely should use is the add development dependency Rspec. We definitely need that in our gem. And if you were to run Rspec, so I have Rspec installed on this machine outside of this gem for other gems. Like plenty of other gems use Rspec to test it. And if you were to run Rspec here, you're going to notice that you're going to get an error, and that's Rspec core is not part of the bundle. Add it to the gem file. So you actually need to go and add this into the gem spec in order to run Rspec like that. So rather than pasting in the error, we should paste in this add development dependency. So this is certainly useful and basically required for us to move forward here too. So now if we run bundle, that will install Rails and the dependencies like Rspec. Now if we run Rspec, it should run the test, and it does. So that's awesome. We've made great progress. We got this set up. Got through 2 great pull requests that we got yesterday. So now let's wrap this up today, and let's make a commit to, let's see what we got here. So we added the development dependency. Let's add Rspec to the gem spec as a dev dependency. And then let's also make a separate commit for removing those requires, because I'm pretty sure, and maybe I'm wrong, definitely call me out if I'm wrong on this, but the requires seem to already be done, especially if we've required Rails at the top of the file. I think the require Rails test doesn't, it's kind of duplicating things and maybe doesn't test exactly what we want. So let's just keep it as simple as this and make this commit to clean up those specs. And please let me know in the comments if we can make that better, if these tests actually do work and I'm just misunderstanding things. So let's save this commit as remove required tests as a terrible commit, but I'm tired and we'll leave it at that. Not the way you should make your commit messages, but sometimes you have to. So yeah, we got through these 2 pull requests. I think that is set up correctly. And the last thing I'd like to do, so we'll wait to see what we find out about this comment on the rail tie. And then the last thing we'll do is we'll add the travis.yaml file so we can get Travis CI, not Circle CI, Travis CI into our gem. So let's go do that. Since we've got a Ruby gem here and we're not going to use the rake command for much other than running specs, let's actually configure this so that when you type rake, it will run Rspec instead. So rather than having to type in Rspec and use that every time, we should just be able to type rake and make Rspec the default here. So let's Google that. Let's Google rake Rspec default and see what we can find. This first one shows that you can add rake task to your rake file for Rspec. So if you paste this, let's get rake file open here. If you paste this code in, this will add the rake tasks from Rspec into your application. So when you run rake spec, this will run the tests, which is awesome. It loads up all the directories and handles that for you. And that's good, but then this isn't actually setting the default rake task. So we can say tasks default is spec. So now if we run rake, this should just jump into running rake spec for us. So that is all we need to do to make rake automatically run Rspec tests by default. So this is what is pretty common to do anyways for gem. Probably only really need to run your tests like that. There's not many other things aside from the regular bundler gem tasks, which are like releasing the gem and updating or releasing new versions is pretty much it. So this is useful for us to add, and then that also allows us when we're building the Travis CI setup that it can use the default rake command and then execute the code. So otherwise, you would have to say, like, here's the specific command to run the test. You would have to override it, and, like, it's not a big deal for us to override it, but also, like, it makes sense to just type rake to run our tests. So we can basically create this .travis.yaml file now. We need to set the language, and we can specify the Ruby versions that we want to test this against, and then see how this goes. So I'm going to do that, and let's open up .travis.yaml. Let's make this file, paste this in, and let's do 2.2, what is the latest one? 2.2.0, it's not, is it? 2.2.2, that's what I thought it was. So let's do that. Let's do all the stable versions. So 2.1.6. And then, 193 isn't really needed anymore. 2.0. Can't hurt to test that too. And it should work totally fine. I don't think we need to test 187. That's really old. JRubies, we could do JRuby. I don't think it really matters. We don't have anything too special going on, so let's just keep it at these, and we can add more of whatever we want to do later. But this gem's like really straightforward. It's just regular old Ruby code. So if there's anything that's specific to one of these languages like JRuby, or we're doing something that they maybe don't support, then it would make more sense to test against those. But in this case, like, we're not really doing anything that these like can't support. So even if we just tested against 2.2.2, I would be totally fine with it. It's not a big deal. If we were doing a more complicated gem that might deal with threading or something complicated like that JRuby does very differently from MRI, that would be a situation where we'd want to make sure we defined all those to test against. So let's add these two to our gem file, and actually let's see about adding the Travis CI image. I forget exactly how you need to do this. Embedding a status image. So these are the little builds passing, builds failing images that are really useful for embedding in your into your README. Actually, your README is a perfect place for that, and people are starting to put a lot of those like code climate GPAs and whatever, and I think it's awesome. I think we should definitely do that. Let's just put it right here at the top, Travis CI. I just grabbed their example here, And I believe we can take this URL and we could say exit3 simple calendar.svg, and that is that. So let's translate this, or let's fix this URL, and we want the master branch, and that should be it. We should be good. This should automatically show up correctly in our README. So that should be all that we really need to do for this. So let's add that to the README. Let's commit this. Add Travis CI and make Rspec the default rake task. And that's it. That's really all we need. So let's push this up to origin master. And let's see what we've got on the main repository's README. Build failing. If we click on that, we should actually correct the URL so it takes us to Travis CI. That would be a great idea. So if we go to Travis CI, exit3, simple calendar, not .svg, we should be able to see this. And it probably is running the test. Cross your fingers. If it is running the test, then we've got this all set up correctly. I've already gone in to my account and turned on Travis CI for this repository, so you don't have to worry about that. But yeah, let's see what happened. So it did run the tests 30 minutes ago, and maybe there's a current one running right now. We'll find out. That was the failed one. It's loading very slowly. Let's, in the meantime, update this so that we have the image as a link. And I can't remember how you need to do that with Markdown, because it's a little, I think it's a little more complicated syntax, but maybe it's not. Maybe you just have to do, you can do a nested one, which is interesting. I don't know if GitHub can do that. We may have to check that out. So, or maybe this isn't worth dealing with. That could totally be too. Yeah, let's not worry about it. That seems like one of those things that's not a big deal. So let's see if we can restart this build and see if this is going to work. So our last commit SHA was 49FD. This is for not that commit though, so I don't know if it found that. Here's 49FD, so I think this number 2 is started. Let's find out. And that was it. All of our tests passed. All one test, but on 3 Ruby versions, so that's pretty good. The tests run really slow, so I have to cut that out. That was really, really boring to wait through that for like 10 minutes. And yeah, this vlog has gone on really long. I didn't expect it to go on for this long, but we got through all of these. We got an extra thing done. I got the Rspec stuff set up, pull request merged. We got another pull request reviewed, and we got Travis CI set up. So that's pretty good. Not bad. Just got Travis CI set up. Image is embedded on the README. Let's see. Let's do, yeah. Let's see. Cool. Yeah, let's do that. Looks good. So that took longer than expected, but day 3 of the vlog is done. We've got all our open source stuff that we intended to do. I really just wanted to get Rspec set up today. Tomorrow, I think the goal is to do something more with the tests. We have our first Rspec test set up, and I think we just need to talk about sort of what tests we want, how much we want to test, what type of tests we want to do. I think some integration, some unit tests will be the sort of balancing we want to strike. And yeah, we'll see if anybody else has things going on in the meantime. So talk to you next vlog. Peace.